After several months of inactivity, it is decided that I'm going to get in here and tackle some of this rust. I want to get this battery tray panel first because the floor pans are gone, and this will give me much easier access, especially to the backside. First up, I get to use one of my all-time favorite tools that I can't find enough excuses to use often enough. It's a plasma cutter. Truly awesome tool. Does a lot of work in a hurry. No distortion, either from the heat or just from the hammering effect of using an air chisel or even a hand chisel. There's some things that it does that you just can't hardly find any other way of doing it. I had a bearing race in an axle housing once that I just couldn't get to come out. And all I did was stuff a rag in the tube to keep the sparks from going inside. Snuck in there with that plasma cutter, did a real quick little dainty cut, and relieves the pressure off the race and it'll come right out. It's one of those things that once you've got it, you can find all sorts of things to do with it. Taking the panel or the plasma cutter and cutting around the battery hold down brackets, leaving them in place at the time being to see if I can keep them there as much as I can keep in the original positions. The cleaner the firewall will look. Once the lower panel is out of the way, then I can get underneath the brackets and grind off the shelf panel instead of having to drill out the spot welds. A lot of this video is in speeded up mode. This right here is real time, but the grinding and the hammering gets kind of tedious to watch, so the next section, most of it will be speeded up and hopefully help the viewing enjoyment. After grinding the spot welds down, the remaining portions of them, now getting in with a straight edge and making some witness marks to cut out the what I call the inner. This panel there is 3 layers thick. That has become rusted. Fortunately, it's not a very large area, and I can get in, and it's a pretty simple panel to make. Should just be a 90-degree bend with maybe a little bit of forming with the shrinker stretcher. After using the cutoff wheel, I've switched to a air-powered hacksaw. This is a wonderful little tool. Unfortunately, it sounds a lot like a dentist drill, but the earmuffs make it tolerable. You can get into nice little places with it, and with a fine blade, it cuts, once again, with no distortion. A little more touch up with the cutoff wheel, and out it comes. Here I'm cutting the vertical portion of the panel. It's kind of a U-shaped panel, and the original panel was one piece, so I'll be sectioning this one in. I've made some marks, and we'll trim it down, trim the other panel to fit, then edge weld everything together. There again, the little air-powered saw can sneak in there and into the corners. Now, this tool here is a wonderful tool. It is a spot weld driller. It has a carbide cutting bit with a foot behind it. It's sort of C-shaped. And when you pull the trigger, the drill moves down, cuts the weld. It's a great little tool. I had this one given to me, and I sure wished I'd have had it back in the days when I was doing collision repairs. The spot welds in this car are many and almost overlapping. See here, I'm trying to feel behind the panel, see where the little welds are, and drill them out one at a time. Later you'll see I just sort of get in there and just drill everywhere, because hammering around on them, it was hard to find a starting and a stopping part for the welds. But this, again, this tool does nice. With a little practice, you can easily just remove the top layer of the weld and not damage the panel behind. You can see here I'm still trying to find the individual welds. I haven't given up on that just yet. Now with the spot welds drilled, taking what is effectively an old wood chisel that I don't mind abusing, and slipping in between the panels, trying to break what's left of the spot welds loose. And as what's apparently very evident here, I have grossly underestimated the size hammer that I probably should be using. However, the effort involved in crawling out from under the car hasn't yet become greater than the need to hammer with the body hammers, so I continue on as is. The object here is trying to get underneath the little outer panel and hit it in such a way that the remaining edges of the spot weld break loose, trying to keep from distorting the thin sheet metal, which is also one reason for starting with that smaller hammer. The more I can keep everything in its original position, the easier it will be to fit the finished panel. And here I have decided that I need to get more aggressive. This is a thin cutoff wheel that I use to cut the panels to fit, and seemed to grind around the holes that I had drilled, trying to make the material thinner so that my chisel can snap them off. I've sped up the video here. A lot of this is a little tedious to watch. I have gone out and gotten more aggressive with the tools. This is now another cutoff wheel, but this one is a 1/4 inch thick, where the other one I think was about a 32nd or 16th. And as you can see here, I have gotten more aggressive with the hammer also. By this time, I've decided that with this amount of spot welds that are holding this on, and the fact that they're overlapping, that being dainty isn't getting the job done. So I'm now just grinding across the panel to be removed pretty much everywhere, making the entire thing thin enough that hammering and chiseling will remove what's left. Here I've switched back to the thinner cutting wheel and I'm in the process of cutting the other vertical portion of the tray. Access here is quite a bit tighter. The battery bracket, hold down bracket is sort of in the road. I'll end up cutting it off at the firewall and weld the piece back onto the original bracket at the proper time. But I also found that the steering column bracket that holds everything in place wraps around the corner of that intersection, and it is thoroughly welded onto the firewall. So in the process of this, I've used the various tools, cut up to it. I did end up actually cutting the two angles off of the steering column bracket. The one angle I will weld back together. The reason being is that the spot welds to the firewall are in such a place that if I drill the welds out, I really won't be able to get in and grind them smooth and look nice. This way I can retain the original welds, and the weld the bracket back together will be inside the car and will not be able to be seen. The other piece is about 3/4 of an inch wide and maybe 1.5 inches long, and that thing I think had 16 spot welds in it. It was thoroughly welded and there was no way I could cut it off. The panel or the bracket is maybe 4 times higher than what the sheet metal is, and so it just would have tore the firewall to pieces. So I will just make another bracket corner piece and out of some thicker sheet metal and weld it together. Well, pretty good afternoon's work. Got that panel cut out. I made the right decision in trying to attack this panel first before I put the floor pans in. Access was much better. The inner isn't as bad as I had expected. It's like just one 8-inch piece with a 90-degree bend in it should take care of that. The inside, pretty well all stripped down. Had to cut the steering column bracket off in a couple pieces so I can weld it back together later. It'll do less damage and won't have to grind the spot welds on the other side and being able to weld it from this side. So that's pretty much it for today. Next day, should be putting something in it.